Okay. Good afternoon. I'm welcoming you today to the Coping with Grief During the Holidays workshop. This is being sponsored by the Pleasant Hill Commission on Aging and Hospice of the East Bay. I'm sorry, I'm blocking our... The Commission of Aging, who is hosting this through the City of Pleasant Hill, is a group of 9 appointed volunteer commissioners. We're appointed by the City of the Pleasant Hill Council to consider matters on aging in the community, including providing workshops such as these. Today, we actually have a large group of us here. There are 4 of us present, myself, or 5 of us, myself, Dana, Marion, Vicki, and Carol. I'm glad to see you all here today. So a little bit of housekeeping before I get going. Today's workshop is a hybrid. It's both on Zoom and in person. It is being recorded. So if you miss something, don't get all your notes taken. You can review it at any time. Or if you know anyone else who would like to participate and couldn't, you can direct them to the city website. During our question and answer periods, we're going to ask that everyone try to speak into the microphone. You can flag me down, and that our host repeat the question whenever possible so we can all hear it. We want to understand what's going on. For those of you participating on Zoom, please use the raise hand button and you will be called upon when it is your turn to speak. Zoom callers will be participating with audio only. We won't be able to see you today. For those of you who are present, restrooms are here through this side door where the exit sign is. Now I'm going to introduce our speaker today. Joe Lumello, guess I said it right, has received his master's degree in clinical psychology from Antioch University, Los Angeles. Over the past 30 years, he's held several positions in nonprofit end-of-life healthcare, from case management of people living with HIV/AIDS to running the largest HIV testing and counseling facility, Hospice Care, in the state, I'm sorry, to supporting grieving members of the community. Joe began his career in nonprofit hospice care in 2003. I'm tongue-tied today, I apologize. And since 2011, he has served as the city manager of grief support and volunteer services at Hospice East Bay here in Pleasant Hill. So without further ado, it's your turn, Joe.
Thank you. And oh gosh, are you applauding Cami? Because please don't applaud me. I haven't said anything yet. Thank you all for allowing me to be here and to present on coping with the holidays while grieving. And thank you to the Commission on Aging and Pleasant Hill, the City of Pleasant Hill, for allowing me to present to you. My goal is to go through the presentation, and I think we've booked enough time to allow for questions and answers towards the end. So I would encourage you, if you have any questions about any of the slides that we're going to be presenting, please make a note, and then I'll do my best to answer them for you at the end of the presentation. All right, let's begin. There we go. You mentioned that there was a delay on that, sorry. So just to get us going, let me go over some of the discussion points for today's presentation. We're going to delve into what expectations we might have about the holidays, especially now that somebody that we love deeply is no longer with us. We're going to identify feelings of grief and loss. We'll review common grief reactions. We'll explore potential holiday grief triggers and how to cope with them. We'll develop strategies to manage grief during the holiday season. And of equal importance, we'll learn how to support others who may be grieving. So Hallmark holiday, I really love this statement because I think everyone here has an idea of what the holidays look like. the expectations that we have of ourselves during the holiday season, as well as the expectations we have of family and friends that we're going to be with. And if you're anything like me, you know, I spent a long childhood watching a lot of holiday television shows, and everybody in those shows was happy and loving and kind and supportive. Now, in reality, that's not exactly how it played out in my home. There were unresolved conflicts and issues from years prior. There were the family dynamics. So holidays in my house were somewhat stressful. Your experience may be different. Now that we're dealing with the loss of a loved one, we might find that, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So now that we're dealing with the fact that we're going through this holiday season without a loved one in it, we might actually find that we really feel the need to hold on to those traditions that we had while our loved one was alive. It's really important. It's going to help normalize this holiday season for me and maybe for the guests that are going to be here. So I'm really going to stick with those traditions. Or you might find that you're so emotionally compromised right now because you're dealing with this trauma of loss that you can't bring yourself to deal with the holidays, let alone having to go to a holiday event, let alone being responsible for the holiday event. So we'll talk about that. You may be asking yourself, is it possible to recreate holidays of the past without my loved one in it? You know, you may also be thinking, well, wait a minute, this trauma has happened to my family. We're off balance right now, and it's unfair because the rest of the world is enjoying their holiday season with their traditions. You know, and if you're like me, maybe the holiday season, you start feeling a little anxious because the holidays have been challenging for you in the past. Again, you add your feelings of grief and loss to the equation, and it's going to make things more intense. So before we get into a working definition of grief for the purposes of this presentation, I would love to read to you a quote that I find really powerful. The author's name is Hara Estroff Marano, and she states, quote, "Grief has always been a difficult emotion in America, disenfranchised in a culture fixated on happiness and positivity. I believe what she is referring to is that we live within a dominant culture that tends to avoid discussions of death and dying until that situation arises. And what I mean by that is we don't have a narrative for death and dying. It's something that we avoid at all costs until we absolutely have to face it. And by extension, the same thing happens to people who are grieving. We have an understanding from the dominant culture of what is deemed appropriate in terms of expressions of grief. Another circle to deal with is our family of origin. They've given us messages about what is considered appropriate and inappropriate when expressing grief. Then we have the culture that the culture of family that we created, and we may have a slightly different message there. And then our network of other family and friends all have a different spin on grief. So here we are dealing with the fact that we've just dealt with a major trauma, someone we loved very much has died, and we may not know how to express ourselves because we may have people trying to change how we're feeling. Or we may find that the people closest to us are really uncomfortable with the subject matter. So we tend to isolate, which is the opposite of what a grieving person really needs. So what is grief? Well, as you can see from the slide, grief is a natural consequence to the loss of a loved one. It's a healthy expression of response to the death, and it is an extension of love we have for the person who died. Grief is an internal expression of the bond that we have for the person who died, it's an inevitable part of living. I mean, in theory, if one never has another relationship with another human, we may be able to avoid grief, but that's not part of what it means to be a human. We're social by nature, by design. So we're going to have these feelings when somebody that we love is no longer available to us. And there is no right or wrong way to grieve, but let me preface that. As long as the way you choose to express and experience your grief isn't causing you physical or emotional harm, then it's perfectly acceptable. There is no wrong way to do this. So what does grief feel like? You know, it affects our hearts, it affects our emotions, it affects our body. So it is a complete and immersive experience. It can be, and this is just a minor list of some more common grief reactions, perhaps shock and numbness, fatigue and exhaustion, especially if prior to the death of your loved one, you were their primary caregiver. Sleep disruptions, meaning that you're sleeping all the time after the loss of your loved one, or you're not sleeping at all. You're constantly being disrupted. Same with appetite. Either you're trying to cope with the loss by overeating, or you're too emotionally distraught to even think about eating. There's a sense of restlessness and irritability. There's a fight or flight reflex, a startle to stimuli. There's deep emptiness and sadness, there's heartache, and what I refer to as grief attacks. A client mentioned this years ago, and I think it's really valid. She was at the supermarket. Her husband had passed away a few months earlier. She was going down one of the aisles in the supermarket, and as she said, these were her words, "I just lost it." And what came next was deep shame and embarrassment, so much so that she left her cart in the aisle and ran to her car and ran home. But then she gave some thought as to what triggered that grief attack, and she put it together. She was in the pasta aisle of the supermarket, and it dawned on her at that moment that her husband's favorite dish was a certain pasta dish that she made. So that grief attack wasn't completely out of the blue. It was connected to what she was experiencing in that moment. And I think it's really important to touch on the fact that she felt shame in expressing her grief. We spent some time trying to break that down, and it comes to the fact that we all live with a degree of cultural expectation around how we express ourselves. So, food for thought there. Some other reactions that are fairly common, a sense of anger or guilt and regret, which are two separate things. Relief, which again, for someone who has been a caregiver to their loved one prior to death, there's a sense of relief. Oh gosh, I no longer have to sleep with one eye open. I no longer have to, focus my entire existence on meeting the caregiving needs for my loved one. My loved one is no longer suffering. And then what happens often after that sense of relief comes a sense of guilt. Oh, I shouldn't be feeling this. I should be focused on meeting the needs of other members of my family. So there's this sense of shame, perhaps, that they're having a reaction to the death of their loved one. Depression is not uncommon, as opposed to clinical depression, which is a serious medical issue that needs attention. Being situationally depressed, meaning that you're depressed because you're dealing with the loss of a love. Well, that's understandable, and it can very much be part of an individual's grief journey. Feelings of suicidal thoughts or feelings, again, not in the sense that someone has a plan developed that they're going to inflict harm on themselves, but the simple idea of, gosh, life would be so much easier if I was just with my loved one. Or I wouldn't be feeling this emotional distress if I didn't have to wake up tomorrow. That's an understandable sense of wanting to be with your loved one or not wanting to experience the amount of pain that you're in. And that's very different than, say, a more formal thought or threat of self-harm. isolating or withdrawing from others. This happens when people feel that they're just not being heard in their grief, that they must be doing something wrong because everyone around them wants them to act differently, think differently, feel differently. They want you to be the person you were before the loss happened. So rather than have to deal with all of these demands, some folks will just say, you know what, I'm safe in my home, in my room, with these four walls. Nobody's going to have to challenge the way I'm feeling. Disorientation and forgetfulness, the next bullet, difficulty focusing and grief fog. This is all interrelated. And this is a phenomenon that maybe you've experienced shortly after the death of a loved one, but is almost universal. And I love the term grief fog because it really is a great descriptor. What tends to happen for a lot of folks immediately after the death of their loved one is that they're going to be getting through the day, but they're not really sharp on the details. I see people nodding heads, all right. You may have gotten in the car because you're out to do an errand, and while you're in the car, you forget where you were going or what you were doing. To me, this is the body's way of helping us emotionally adjust to the reality of the loss. So there's a bit of a delay. Cognitively, we know that our loved one died. Emotionally, our emotions are playing tricks on us. We're saying, well, maybe this is a bad dream. Or maybe, they're just away and they're going to come back. They're just on vacation or at work. It's our body trying, it's our emotions trying to cope with this new reality. Need to be around people who understand. The chief reason why folks come to a grief support group is to be in community with others, where you don't have to explain what you're feeling, where you don't have to justify how you're grieving, but you're in a group with others where you don't have to explain why you're not feeling happy today, or why today was a bad day because it's the anniversary of your wedding. Others are going to get it. There's a sense of community there. Staying busy is a very common grief reaction. It's not necessarily a particularly effective one in the long term, but it is a way to cope. So here you are just dealing with this traumatic event. You've got these feelings you may not really understand, or you're not sure of how to process. So what's the next best thing? Let me take care of something else, or in many cases, let me take care of someone else. It works. It's a coping mechanism. However, it's not a long-term coping mechanism, because what's happening is you're not processing those feelings of grief. And they don't go away. They pile up in a corner. And if they're not addressed in some meaningful way, and that's different for everyone here, they will manifest in some sort of physical way. It's very common for folks who aren't processing grief, as an example, to develop digestive issues. And they do not have a history of this prior. So, and what we know is that our grief is tied into our immune system, and our immune system is obviously tied into our gastrointestinal tract. So it makes sense that if we're out of balance in one aspect of our lives, it's going to have a ripple effect on other aspects of our lives. Talking to the deceased is not uncommon. Some people find it incredibly comforting. Other people, especially those who are observing you talking to your loved one, might find it distressing. And then questioning our belief systems. It is not uncommon for someone to question their spirituality or faith because this terrible thing has just happened to them and their family. So what makes each person's grief unique? I kind of danced around this topic, but let's dig in a little deeper. Pretty much who you are, your personality, and how you view and cope with the lack of control over painful events. How many of us like to think we're in control of our lives? I like to think that, but life keeps proving me wrong, and something like this that is so already culturally uncomfortable, it really starts to weigh heavily. Your culture, the dominant culture we live in, the culture of your family, your ethnicity, your religious and spiritual beliefs, your own personal beliefs are all going to impact how you choose to grieve or how you experience grief. The person that died, certainly. Grief is not a one-size-fits-all. You know, when I think of all the people in my life that have died, my grief reaction has been different to every single person, and that's based on the relationship that I had with that person. The timing and circumstances of the death. Now, in hospice, we deal with natural death. People come to the end of their lives naturally. However, we clearly know, if we spend any time watching the news, that there are other ways that people die as well. And how the person dies, our reaction to that person's death, and the way that they died is also going to impact how we grieve. How you have dealt with traumatic, life-changing events in the past, other losses, will inform how you grieve today as well. Your coping skills. Do you have good coping skills? You know, what are they? If your coping skills is to care for the needs of someone else, well, again, that may work in the short term, but as a long-term coping skill, it will become less and less effective. Same with the use of alcohol or drugs. It'll do the trick initially, but over time, its impact you will not get the desired effect out of that coping mechanism. And the extent of your support system. If you've got a really great network of family and friends who allow you to express your feelings without passing judgment or being critical of what you say, well, you're in the 1%. Congratulations. Most of us don't have that. Our support system's a little scratchy. You know, one of the first things I do with a lot of clients when I start working with them is I'll ask them to do a simple exercise. Take a piece of paper and draw a line right straight down the middle of it. On the left side of that column, write down all of the names of the people in your system of support, family, friends, acquaintances. On the other side of the column, next to their name, write down how you feel supported by them. Somebody in your group might be really good at making you laugh. Another person might be really good at allowing you to express your feelings without passing judgment. Another might be really good at preparing a home-cooked meal. So when you're in need of something, rather than going to the person you think should be giving you support, look at the list. You know, Judy is really good at listening to me and providing me with unconditional support, and that's what I need right now. I'm going to call Judy rather than Frank, who's really good at making me laugh because my need isn't going to get met. So it's really knowing your support system and knowing how they support you in everyday life. That's going to inform how they're going to support you during this difficult and traumatic time. So some holiday grief triggers. Special occasions like holidays that we're going through, but also anniversaries, birthdays, other important days, high school graduation, the wedding of a child. All of these things are going to be triggers because you're moving forward now without the person that you want to share that experience with. These are constant reminders that will likely trigger some semblance of grief for some time to come. But please do keep in mind, the grief isn't constant. It will change over time. A favorite song of your deceased loved one could be a potential trigger. Sounds or smells. I have a great example of this. My mom died over a decade ago. And I had a suitcase of hers that I had not opened up for quite some time. And there it was in the back of my closet. And I opened it up and out came her scent There was a hair comb with a couple of her hairs attached to it. There was the perfume that she wore on her clothes that was still, I got to tell you, it left me speechless for a few minutes. And all of a sudden, I just remembered a series of memories that I hadn't thought of since childhood. It was bittersweet. It was great. I felt connected to my mom again after a long time. But it was also sad too. Lost opportunities, the woulda, coulda, shouldas. In other words, this is common. This speaks to that feeling of regret that I discussed earlier, that the not being able to have that final goodbye, not being able to say that final I love you, not being able to resolve a family conflict. You know, these are all the woulda, shoulda, couldas that play in our mind after that death. And it's sort of unfair because we really can't address them now, but they still play like tapes in our head. So how long does grief last? You're all seating, so this is good. And it shouldn't come as a surprise. It is a lifelong process. And again, in our culture, I think we tend to think of grief as something that we roll out when we have a loss, a death, more specifically. But when you look at the various emotions that are part of the grief journey, these emotions are things that we experience much more frequently. A sense of anger, surprise, shock, disbelief. These are emotions that we also trot out when we're dealing with another or a different kind of life-changing event. So rather than think of the emotions associated with grief as something that happens occasionally, perhaps it does us all a bigger favor if we start acknowledging that these emotions exist in us and they occur much more frequently. It's certainly not a linear process. If anything, grief is more akin to a roller coaster ride. You know how those work? You have profound ups and downs in the beginning. Eventually, though, the ride levels out. And I think that is a much better analogy for grief than thinking that you start in a really bad, painful place and that your next step up, you're going to feel less of that. And then the next step up, you feel less of that. Because that's not how it works. And if you're going under that assumption, there's going to be a moment in the grocery aisle where you lose it. And what's the first, and when the first thing you're going to say is, I am now failing in my grief journey. See, I can't even do this right. No, that's because we tend to think of it as a linear process. Avoid that thinking. Whoa, boy, I'm not really good with this mic, am I? Avoid that thinking and just be with it. Be with the ups and downs. Over time, they level out. It doesn't follow any prescribed stages. You may have heard of the 5 stages of death and of grief and loss. Dr. Kubler-Ross, who invented those stages, never developed the model for grief and loss. She actually did it after interviewing terminally ill patients, and it was the 5 stages of death and dying. Somehow, over the years, it got co-opted into this concept of death and of grief and loss. There are no definitive phases. It is more of a roller coaster, and eventually, over time, those intense feelings of grief that you had at the beginning will diminish. And the way you grieve will be more to your choosing and more, you'll have more control over when it will occur. Each person adjusts to their new normal at different times. So if the expectation that you have or that your friends and family have is that this is just a temporary situation and you're going to get back to the person that you were prior to this, that's not realistic, because the person that you were prior to this had the person that you loved in it. And that person's no longer there. So you will be different moving forward. Not to say that this is necessarily a negative, it's just a reality. And you can't rush through grief nor hide from it. And I love what author Anne Grant said here. Grief is a process, it isn't a state. And I think with that kind of thinking, it helps normalize the reality that I have have had feelings of grief and loss in the past, and that I will again. So, coping skills. The holidays are here. You may have vivid memories of what they've been for you in the past. You may feel a need to make sure that it's a hallmark holiday this year, especially because your loved one isn't in it. So that's going to create feelings of stress and anxiety. And as you get closer to the actual holiday event, that anxiety level, I'm sure, is going to be rather high. So what can you do to mitigate this? Recognize your grief triggers by simply looking at a calendar and going, okay, this is my loved one's birthday. This was our wedding anniversary. This was the date of our first date. This was the date that we signed up for hospice. And this was the day that my loved one died. So that way, if you I know it sounds silly, but if you have these dates on your calendar, you can at least prepare yourself without being blindsided by the emotions as they arise on that particular day. Identify those triggers. Whenever grief strikes, take note of what's happening to make you feel that way. Like the lady in the pasta aisle. She went back home and thought, well, wait a minute, of course. Okay, I get why this triggered me. And it really helped her move forward because she made a connection, a meaningful connection for her. Accept your feelings. Now, I'm not saying that you just need to simply stop whatever you're doing in the moment and experience those feelings of grief and loss when they come up. If you can, great, that'll help. But we don't live in that world. Sometimes we're occupied with other activities or there are other demands on us. So be aware of that. And if you can't feel it in the moment, plan some time during the course of the day to revisit it, rather than saying, oh, well, I'm going to go home now. I'm going to have to make dinner. My family's waiting for me. That all may be true, but now you're doing it with this additional layer of grief that is coloring that experience for you. Find your special place. You may not be able to plan for each of these instances, but if you develop an action plan on how to cope, it's going to help you. So for example, with the lady in the supermarket again, had she been aware of the fact that these triggers were going to pop up, she could have developed an action plan. Okay, you know what? If this happens, as an example, I'm going to just park my cart right here. I'm going to go into the restroom. I'm going to collect myself. I'm going to feel what I need to feel. And I'm going to finish my marketing. So I'm also going to show you some strategies that don't particularly work. Avoidance, isolation, overworking, overextending, rumination, and the use of alcohols and drugs to numb out. All of these in and of themselves are coping mechanisms, and they can be of benefit for a brief period of time. But complete or predominant reliance on these coping skills are not going to help you in the long run. As I mentioned, we know that avoiding grief, the emotions of grief, will manifest themselves in some sort of a physical ailment. So avoiding the grief for a short period of time may be what you need to do to get through the day, but taking that approach as your primary way of coping with grief is not going to be particularly effective, and it could be harmful in the long run, physically harmful in the long run. Isolation, again, if you've got people around you that have certain expectations of how you are to express your grief or not express your grief, it might be attractive just to go somewhere and be alone. And again, for a short and brief period of time, I encourage that. It helps reflect on what you're feeling. But to use that as your primary way of coping, again, isn't really going to get your grief needs met. Same with overworking and overextending. Again, that busy work, it helps temporarily. I love when clients, I'm talking to them and they go, yeah, I'm staying busy. I'm really handling this grief really well. I'm glad to hear it. And then inevitably, a couple of sessions later, gosh, I thought I was doing good, but, there's these moments just before I go to bed where the tapes just keep playing and I can't get to sleep. Well, maybe that's a sign that you need to take a different approach with your grief. Maybe during the day, like a pressure cooker, let out some of the steam. So that way it doesn't surprise you in the evening when all of your tasks are done and you're trying to get ready to go to sleep. Alcohol and drugs, I'm not here to judge. It helps. It helps initially. I think in the long run, though, obviously we know what alcohol and drugs can do to the human body. So in the long run, it may not be the healthiest way to cope with your feelings. So, now we're looking at the holidays. What steps can you take to get through this, to remain reasonably physically and emotionally intact? So in preparing for the season, consider the following. What do you imagine to be the most difficult parts of the holiday season? Knowing that your loved one isn't at the table. Knowing that you're responsible for cooking the turkey. And you don't want to come to my house if that's the case. Knowing that, this challenging relative that you try to avoid all year long is going to be at the table and they're insensitive and you're in no mood for that because you're dealing with what you're dealing with. So try to be aware of what those triggers are. Plan for them before the day of your holiday event. Who do you predict will be the most difficult people? What do you think will be your grief triggers? Places, events, foods, music, photographs, stories that other people share of your loved one. Be prepared for that. Have a strategy. Well, if this happens and I start to get that feeling in my chest, I think I'm going to excuse myself, go outside, get a breath of fresh air, clear my thoughts and come back. And like I said, in developing that list of your support system, who are some of the people who will support and comfort you? Will they be at your holiday gathering? If not, you might want to invite them. Are they a phone call away? Are they just down the block where you can leave your event for a few minutes and say, I just need a sane person to talk to right now? So again, thinking about past holiday seasons, who made the Thanksgiving meal? Was that your responsibility? Are you in the mood to do it this year? Who will set up Christmas decorations? Is that something that you and your deceased loved one always loved doing, but you can't bring yourself to do it now? Can somebody else in your system be that support for you? Ask yourself the following. Is there something you want to do differently this year? It doesn't have to be forever, but you're grieving. You have the permission to do something different if you need to get through this holiday season intact. Do you do these traditions out of habit, tradition, free choice, or obligation? If you've cooked the turkey for your family for the past 10 years because you feel it's a tradition, but your heart's not in it, can you give yourself a break this one holiday season? Is the preparation of the holiday meal a one-person job? Has it been in the past? Are you willing to allow others to come in and help you with the meal so you can get through the process? Are you the person that's always the responsible party to make sure that everything gets done at your holiday event? Can you appoint someone else? Can you let go of the need to control the event? And bottom line, do you actually like upholding these holiday traditions? And if they're meaningful and important to you, then do it. If you're doing it for someone else, I'm going to ask you to think about that and why it's important you to do it on behalf of someone else. So when you're mourning, there is no magic trick to get through the holidays. Each person has suffered a different loss, and each must navigate their own grief journey. So here are some suggestions. Adjust your expectations. The holiday won't be the same. It's not going to be the same. It will not be the same. Your loved one is not here. It's intrinsically changed moving forward. Accept this up front if you can, to avoid the disappointment that the tradition, the holiday, isn't working out the way you expected it to. Decide what you can handle this year and tell others. You know what? I'm just not cooking the holiday meal this year. Someone else is going to have to step up. Do what feels comfortable. Again, there's no right or wrong way to behave. Keep some traditions that are important to you and maybe start some new ones moving forward. A great example might be if you feel this is a way of honoring your loved one, have a place setting at the table for them. Or encourage people to tell stories about their favorite story about your loved one. Or something that is going to acknowledge the importance this person has in your life, and that you're able to still share in some way this holiday with them. Again, ask for help. It doesn't mean that you will never be able to get back to being responsible for the specific holiday task that you enjoy or feel it's important that you uphold. Maybe just for this year, consider doing it a little differently, reaching out to others. Find someone to listen. Again, in that list of your support system, find the person who will allow you to express your feelings without passing judgment on it. And it's so rare. I don't know if any of you really have someone like that in your life. It's a bit of a challenge because everyone has an opinion and most everyone is willing to offer it, even if you haven't requested it, right? Make time for exercise. That really helps chip away at those feelings of depression. And I'm not talking about going to the gym and lifting weights. You know, exercise for me after a particularly long and stressful day is to get my dog. I live up in Napa, and I'll walk down the Napa River with my 3 dogs, and just being in nature, being pulled away from the reality of the day really helps. Prioritize. Yeah, don't let endless chores add to your stress. So again, try to get a handle of the holiday season before the actual event, and you may have to delegate some responsibilities. Let people know what you are interested or capable of doing and what you need to give up for the year. And like I do with my dog walks, enjoy spending time in nature. If you are inclined to meditation, mindfulness, prayer, please include that in your grief ritual. Music can be a really important mood lifter. It can also be a bit of a challenge, especially if a song of your loved one suddenly starts playing. Be prepared for whatever emotions come up. Again, include your departed loved one in the celebration. You might want to burn a candle or have that place setting, or, have their photo in an area of prominence in your home. Create maybe a temporary altar for the day where others might be able to light a candle or share a thought or add a photograph to this altar. So your loved one is fully there and represented in the event. Almost every culture has some sort of a veneration or a celebration of the dead. We just went through Dia de los Muertos, which is a beautiful celebration where families come together. And this is a very broad brushstroke, but families come together and they prepare the favorite meals of their departed loved one as offerings, and they gather and they share stories. And you hear stories of other families, and it can be a beautiful, uplifting experience. Help someone else. I gotta tell you, oh, I'm sorry, buy a gift for your loved one and then donate it to charity. If that is going to help you keep your loved one's memory alive, that's a beautiful gesture. Volunteering on behalf of your loved one. Some of our most dedicated volunteers at Hospice East Bay are family members of the patients that we cared for. They want to give that experience to the next family who's in need. And there, as you are well aware, plenty of other volunteer opportunities, things that are important to you or to your loved one. That's a great way of keeping your loved one's memory alive while also feeling like you're connected to them at the same time. And it may sound like an obvious statement, but plan on spending the holiday with people that you enjoy rather than people you feel you need or have a sense of obligation to. Just this one year. Allow people to comfort you. And this might be challenging, especially if you're the person who is the caregiver in your family. Every family has one. Oh, no, I don't need anything. I'm just going to focus on your needs. Well, when you're grieving, that becomes a little challenging because you're not going to be in control of those needs. They're going to be in control of you, especially in the beginning. Allow others to comfort you. More importantly, help them understand what is comforting to you. And then allow them to be that comfort to you. Again, overspending, trying to make the unpleasant feelings of grief and the pain go away. Well, yeah, some people might overspend. It can't buy a happy holiday, and it certainly won't bring back your loved one, and it's really in the long run not going to change your feelings of grief that much in a permanent way. Allow room for laughter and joy. Grieving people are going to have happiness and joy about the person who died, about other aspects of their life. I think what we tend to think initially is, oh no, I can't do this. I have to be respectful of the person who died. Well, perhaps being respectful in some way is to share a funny story about them as well. Encourage others to share those stories too. Laughter can be a very healing part of grief. Don't be afraid to cry. It can actually be a relief. You may, again, plan ahead for your holiday. If you're feeling the tears are coming up, have a plan in place. If you don't want others to see you expressing your emotion, plan on being in a special place, a room, in your home, in your garden, whatever it takes. Certainly spending some quiet time alone to reflect on the loss is never a bad thing. And remind yourself that it won't be as awful as you think. The anticipation of this first holiday without your loved one, I think, is going to be far worse than the actual experience of going through it. When to seek support. So seeking support does not mean that you're failing in your grief journey. It just means that you're seeking ways to experience it in a healthy way. So if certain symptoms become intense and there are no signs of diminishing, it might be time to seek help. It could be from a bereavement counselor. It could be from a psychotherapist. It could be from a priest or a rabbi. There are lots of ways to get support. If you're engaging in risky behaviors in order to numb the pain, such as maybe drinking and then driving somewhere, you might want to look at that as a call for help. If you're experiencing a pervasive sense of fear that prevents you from having close relationships because you just can't go through this again, you might want to talk to somebody about that. Isolating isn't necessarily going to be the answer. A constant preoccupation with death for an extended period of time, if we're ruminating over certain aspects of the loss, especially the more unsavory ones, it may be of benefit to talk to somebody about that, to give you more of a balanced or perspective, a more balanced experience of the grief. loss, feelings of depression that extend beyond the loss. So if you already know that you have feelings of depression, the loss of a loved one is going to trigger that. If the depression feels that it's greater than the loss of your loved one, please seek help. There's lots of different ways. There's talk therapy. There is talking to your physician to see if medications might be in order. That depression is powerful and pervasive and all-encompassing. So not necessarily a good place to want to filter your feelings of grief and loss through. And simply, if you feel like you want to talk to somebody and you don't have that support system already in place. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about how to be a supportive presence to someone who is grieving the loss of a loved one. If you take nothing else away from how to companion someone on their grief journey, this very first bullet is the most important part and the most challenging part. Listen. Be in the moment with that person. Allow them to express their feelings without judgment. Don't impose your own experience, and be patient with the silence. This is actually, there's a term for this. You may have heard it. It's called active listening. And what you're doing is you're actually completely, your sole purpose is to listen to what the other person is saying, not to form an answer, not to think about the fact that there's going to be rush hour traffic on the way home, but just listen without telling them what you think, without telling them how to feel, without telling them that what you just heard was right or wrong. This is a very special experience that so few of us have in the real world. Active listening is not automatic. It's a practiced experience. Reflect back what you heard them say. Part of, again, active listening is to let the person who spoke know that you heard them. Again, not a feeling that we feel that we experience a great deal on a daily basis, to be truly and fully heard. So a way of doing that is to say, now, what I think I heard you say is that this is a very difficult time of year for you, and you're not really sure about how you're going to get through it. That's paraphrasing, or you can even do a direct verbatim quote back. That gives the person who just shared that information an opportunity to go, yes, you got it. Oh gosh, I feel heard. Or no, that's not what I meant. What I'm saying is this. I think we all think that we are good at listening, myself included. It is something to practice. I mean, you'd be surprised how it can deepen a connection you have with another person. Be an active listener, responding back in ways that show empathy. An example would be, as you shared your thoughts and feelings just now, I can imagine the deep love you both shared and how difficult this loss must be for you. Talk about the person who died. Again, culturally, we tend to think, oh no, if I start talking about so-and-so, my friend's just going to burst into tears, and I don't want that to happen because then I've caused them pain. Most people who are dealing with the death of a loved one want to hear stories from others about that person. I know I do. It makes me feel like you cared for them too. It makes me feel like you love them as well. And now that we have, in addition to the bond of knowing this person, we also have the bond that we're grieving the loss of this person together. And be patient with the process. No two deaths are the same. No two grief responses are the same. And I think and you may have experienced this yourselves, I think in our culture, people will tend to think that they need to leave you in a better place. So what you will hear from folks, and I'm guilty of this as well, oh, well, at least focus on the happy times you had together. You should be thankful that your loved one's no longer suffering. You're still young. You can have another relationship. Again, the intent was to be supportive, but imagine being on the receiving end of any of those statements. And you may have a few that you have stung a little bit too. And here we are now saying, well, I know that this person meant well. So now here we are pulling away from our grief in order to care for that person who just said something that may have felt a little insensitive. So what can you do to help? Don't ask, just do. A very common thing is to say, I am here for you. You just tell me what you need. Well, if any of you have experienced grief before, you have no idea what you need. So rather than ask, do. Show up. Take the trash out. Mow the lawn. Bring a home-cooked meal. Go pick up the dry cleaning. Just simple acts without having the grieving person have the presence of mind to tell you what they need, because chances are they're not going to know. And have appropriate expectations for the person who's grieving. Again, they're not going to ever go back to the person they were before this loss. Grief is a life-altering experience. Give that person the room they need to express their feelings. However foreign it may be to you and whatever you've experienced with loss before, it's okay. That's their journey. A grieving person is not the same person before death. We've talked about that already. This is normal. Having expectations that they're somehow going to miraculously return to that person is not fair to them. It's certainly not fair to you because you're not going to have that same relationship with them. And don't take it personally. The way the person expresses their emotions, they're going to be raw. They may say things, they may do things that are out of character, that may feel threatening or offensive. Know that they're in an altered state. Give them the room to be less than perfect. And keep checking in on them, even if they say they're doing okay. How many times have you seen someone in the street and said, how you doing? And they answer, okay. Or the same thing, vice versa to you. They ask you how you're doing and you answer, okay. Maybe you're not feeling okay, but it's easier. It's expected rather than saying, oh gosh, I'm so glad you asked. Today is a particularly bad day. Let me tell you about it. Allow the grieving individual to set the pace in accepting the reality of their situation and follow their lead. Be honest and not evasive. Being straightforward can decrease anxiety and provide comfort and cultivate trust. So if a grieving person asks you, so is it wrong for me to be crying all the time? I don't honestly know how I can answer that. Your grief is your grief. It sounds like that's where you are right now. I'm going to be here and support you regardless of what feelings you're experiencing. Be available to a very wide range of thoughts, emotions that the grieving person will express. Through awareness and acceptance of your own emotional relationship to mortality, you can relate to another person's journey with less anxiety and increased presence. So if you're one of the fortunate few that has not experienced a significant loss, that doesn't mean that you cannot be a supportive presence to others. You simply have to reflect on a difficult and traumatic time in your life. Remember what you were feeling. Use that in being a supportive presence to the person who's grieving. What not to say? I think I kind of already jumped the gun and offered a few, but here are some more that I know I've heard, and I don't think I've said any of these, but it was God's will, or you're lucky that you had this time together. He, she, they are in a better place. I have a friend who had the same experience, not particularly validating of yours, right? I know how you feel. No, with all due respect, you do not. Even if you and I are experiencing the same loss, Your grief journey is going to be different than mine. The range of emotions you're going to experience will be different than mine. It's not a competition. Shouldn't you be over it by now? It's been 6 weeks. It's been 6 months. It's been 6 years. Shouldn't you stop grieving at this point? No. Grief doesn't go away. It changes over time. You know, the grief that I have for my mom now, 10, 12 years after her death, is very different than the grief I was experiencing right after her death. I guess the expression time heals is sort of appropriate here. And again, don't be sad, focus only on the happy times you had together. All of these things I think are really well-intentioned, but they don't land that way, do they? Imagine being on the receiving end of any of these. If any of you are courageous enough at the end of the presentation, I would love to hear if you've heard anyone offer words of comfort like these to you and what your reaction was to it. So in closing, I want to offer this, this poem. I think actually it's a blog post, to be honest with you. It's called Tinsel and Tears by Darcy Sims and Andrea Gambill. Do what you can this season and let it be enough. But whatever you do, try not to lose the holiday completely. It may not be the same as it was before, but it is the holiday season and you are in it. No matter how shattered your life, how fragmented your dreams, there must be light somewhere. There must be hope somewhere. Our loved ones have died. We did not lose them, nor did we lose the love we shared. Our loved ones were and still are a part of us. We cannot lose their love or our love for them. So thank you. In closing, I believe Juanita mentioned that the PowerPoint slides, I only made a few copies, I apologize, but they will be available on the website. Is that correct? Yes. Great. And on the last slide, but also it was just on the last slide here, were resources for grief support. And in closing, I want to let you know that Hospice East Bay offers free grief counseling to anyone in need. So please feel free to reach out. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And also please feel free to reach out if you're in need of support. Thank you. Question, oh, hand, oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, please, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, microphone time. There you go.
The microphone. Okay. I took care of my mom at her end of life, and I was with Kaiser Hospice.
Kaiser.
And I just have, don't be afraid of hospice. People think that, oh, yeah, that's making this statement. They had a support group for caregivers. And so does Meals on Wheels. Use it. If you're in that position where you're going through this process, there are resources that are amazing.
Yeah, thank you for offering that. I think the biggest challenge for a lot of caregivers is they're torn between the reality of meeting caregiving needs at the expense of their own needs and vice versa. So for caregivers, it's difficult for them to pull away, even if it's just for 90 minutes a week, to go to a group. But I'm glad that there are caregiver groups out there. We do a little different approach here at Hospice East Bay. We're just starting a brand new volunteer program for caregiver outreach. So we're going to be reaching out to all of our families to check in on the caregivers specifically to see what their needs are.
There were some caregivers who had a form of PTSD.
Absolutely.
So don't ignore
it. It is absolutely one of the most traumatic experiences for caring for someone, because again, culturally, we're not prepared for what end of life means. It's not like a Hollywood movie where there's music playing in the background and someone who looks reasonably healthy closes their eyes and never wakes up again. End of life after a long and protracted illness looks very different. Any other questions or comments?
So I'd also like to
Oh,
just
okay.
comment for anyone who is participating via Zoom, if you could just use the raise hand feature in Zoom, and then we'll call upon you.
Thank you. I believe you had a question or a comment? Microphone time.
Actually, I have two questions. Excuse me. The first one is, do you know of any place where people could go and have a festive lunch or dinner, like in a hotel? They used to do the huge buffets a couple days before Christmas or Thanksgiving or whatever. I can't seem to find them anymore, but it might be due to COVID that they don't do that,
I
I
think COVID did a real number on that whole buffet restaurant model. I think there was a place here in the city on Crescent that closed down and hasn't reopened that was a buffet style restaurant. So I think that's part of the problem. But any sit down restaurant that's open for the holidays.
Well, that's true, but I was thinking more like when I went many years ago, it was like with the Marriotts, and they would have the tree decoration and, really went all out for,
Yeah.
and that's what I was thinking about.
That's worthy of some research.
Is that around here? Because I can't, okay. Okay, I'll double check, okay. And excuse me, then my second question was, do you have the number for, I guess it would be the government line on aging, how to make a friend over the phone? I'd heard it advertised many times on the,
I'll
on,
show it to you. through
oh,
Skype.
never mind. Thank you.
So just to answer it, you have literature to review that? Great.
It's the friendship line, and it's in the mini guide. I'll show it to you after. It's in, yeah.
And the reason I asked the question is this .org is not the one that they gave over the radio. I'm always in the car and I hear it on the radio and I can't stop and write it down. So that's why I was kind of
Interesting.
here.
And you might want to share that on camera.
She's talking about this resource guide. They have been putting ads on morning radio show about that guide lately. And it's available also on the Commission on Aging website.
Wonderful. Yeah, there was a couple of hands. I think you were first. And we'll get to you next.
Loud enough, I think I can. You're living in Pleasant Hill, we're in Pleasant Hill. There's an organization that has grown over the years, around and about Pleasant Hill. It's on Facebook. If you want to know where to eat, we review restaurants and places to eat. You can
Great.
ask a question, you'll get lots of responses.
Wonderful.
Round and about Pleasant Hill. And if you want to join us, you can get a card and get a discount at many restaurants in town.
I'm all for that. That's great. Thank you. That's a great resource.
Also, I see my Pleasant Hill Senior Center colleagues. I'm going to put a plug in for the Senior Center. Tremendous resource. There are classes, there are things, people that they have a caregiver group. I mean, there's just so much available, and I want to encourage you to take advantage of it.
Thank you for that shameless plug.
And actually sorry, I'll be right here, but I just want to say the website for the senior center has
Mm,
a lot of information.
Great,
And it's
great.
relatively easy to find if you,
Good. Thank you for that.
I don't actually
Thank you.
know the web address, but easy to find.
Hi. I go to the Pleasant Hills Senior Center Grief Group. We meet every Tuesday, which is very helpful. 10 o'clock.
So is it an ongoing group that meets throughout the
Yes.
year? That's
Yes.
wonderful. I'm glad to hear that.
Yes, it's in person, not Zoom.
Great,
It's,
good.
yeah, it's really helpful. Anyways, oh, Tuesday. Mhm. Every Tuesday at the senior center
And that
in
should be on
Pleasant
this,
Hill
that should be on the senior center website
Yes.
and under activities. Great,
at
good.
10 o'clock, right? My question is more on what you were talking about celebrations and meeting people. I had a daughter that died,
Mm.
and it's coming to 2 years now. So I've had a lot of experience, or I've done many of the things that you talk about and have experienced. And yes, people do ask you things like, you should be over it by now. I don't think you ever grow out of it. I think you become a different person. I think you absorb the death, and my daughter lives on in me. But my question was, um, there are people who continue to be disconnected and still ask questions of, God willed it, or go pray, or they try to solve your grief as if your grief
Right.
makes them uncomfortable.
Comfortable, right.
So I never say anything because I'm afraid to hurt somebody, to hurt their feelings. I don't want to, at this age, I don't need to lose friends. I need to gain friends. So, but this year, I'm kind of thinking that to be honest to my daughter and to myself, I have to tell people, thank you, but I don't want to. Thank you. It doesn't take away the hurt.
Yeah.
I don't know what else to do.
Anyone want to?
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for that. That's really, this is what it comes down to. There are going to be people who are going to volunteer their opinions no matter what about how you should. And that, if one can eliminate a word from your grief journey, that's the one word. Eliminate should. Should implies somebody else's opinion. Oh, I should be doing this. Why? Why? Does it help you in your grief journey? Then by all means, consider it. But if you're changing how you choose to express your grief or who you're going to share your feelings of grief with, because you're going to get an answer of, well, don't think that way, think this way. It does on some level pull away from honoring your daughter and her existence. So you're right. It's also difficult to tell people who are closest to us. We don't want to offend them. So let's find words. And I think the way you said it was great. Let's find words to help our friends understand. Thank you for offering your feedback to me. I'll be honest with you, this is my grief journey, and these are my feelings. And it doesn't sound like you would be experiencing this the same way I do. That's okay, but this is how I feel. And I hope in time you can come to value these feelings as much as I do. The grief journey for some will be also a reality check for their network of support and family and friends. You'll find the people who are with you through thick and thin. You'll also find other people who are kind of like, okay, you know what? I'll talk to you when this blows over because it's too uncomfortable for me. So I've got to say that even though grief can be incredibly traumatic and painful, there's a sense of revitalization, maybe that's not the right word, an awakening of, oh, I'm sorry, what was that? Awakening of who I am, what's important to me, and who I want to spend the rest of my life with. That's a tough one because I know for a lot of folks that may mean having to pull away from certain family members. And, you know, we're brought up to believe that blood is thicker than water. And, you know, I've got to say there are some family members in my life that I've chosen not to engage with because they are not giving me what I need. That's my call. I'm not suggesting that you necessarily go to do that. But if death has taught us nothing, or taught us anything, is that life is impermanent. There are no expectations, there are no guarantees that we're going to get out of this and in any other way. So with that said, all of the deaths that I've experienced have led me to a place of, this is my life. I only get one shot at this that I'm aware of. Who do I want in it? Who is with me on this journey? Who is supporting me in this journey? And who do I need to see less of or cut out altogether? That's not the answer for everyone. So, but still, yeah, life is precious. What do you want the remaining time you have on this planet to look like? And who do you want to be part of that? I'll get off my soapbox. Go ahead.
Hold on, we have a question.
So my question is, sometimes when somebody finds out I've lost somebody, they go on and on about their loss. And I can't handle it.
Right.
So how do I shut them up?
On many different levels, depending on the relationship and where you're at in that moment, you could respond in a number of ways. You know, I think probably at that place, if you're that frustrated, the most satisfying response would be to say, "Hey, will you just shut up?" But that's not realistic, right? So perhaps another approach might be to say, you know, thank you for offering what you've offered. Right now, I'm really focused on trying to make sense of what I've just been through. So what I would appreciate from you is to provide me with support rather than share with me your loss. I don't know, did anyone have a slightly different approach that they might want to take in a situation like that? Go ahead. Oh, microphone.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes you can just say, I'm really sorry, but I'm hurting so badly right now. I can't listen to
There you go.
you about your loss.
Great.
I
I
don't
had,
know,
I
just
had
a thought.
I had a group member years ago who was a lady who was involved with a lot of clubs and activities. And she took a break from all of those meetings and obligations to process the death of her husband. And then she's decided to start going back to little by little to these different organizations and whatnot. And she came to group one night really bold and empowered. And she said, I got to tell you what happened. I was at one of my auxiliary meetings and everyone was so great to see me back. And they were offering, you know, opportunities for me to meet new people in life and to move forward and whatnot. And they were all full of suggestions, unsolicited suggestions. So I stopped that by saying, excuse me, if memory serves me, your husband is still alive, correct? And the other person said, well, yes. She goes, well, then perhaps we shouldn't be having this conversation. And she walked away. I'm not saying that's the best response, but you know what? For her, in that moment, it worked. It gave her a sense of control after months of feeling out of control. That's a win. Anyone else? We've got about 5 minutes left. Yes, microphone, we'll get that to you.
I would just like to make a comment about your list of things that people say to try to comfort you that doesn't really comfort you. And one comment that I've heard is, well, he lived a nice long life, as if that should make it less painful. And my thought is, no, that does not make it less painful.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. Something the same lines as, well, they lived to a nice age of 90 and they had a full life. Yeah, but you know what? I needed them here a little longer.
Or he enjoyed doing something. He died while doing something he enjoyed. He died in the outdoors.
Okay, and still, how is that about, my grief, right? Again, this is our culture. We're taught we have to leave somebody in a better place than when we met them, especially when it comes to something that we really don't have a comfort with. Grief, when I first started as a counselor 30 years ago, I really thought that my job was to make my clients stop grieving. And my mentor at the time said, well, why? I said, because, I'm supposed to make them feel better. I'm supposed to help them, get through this. She goes, Joe, if you're going into the work thinking that your job is to make people stop grieving, what you're telling them is they need to stop loving the person who died. You need to think through that a little bit more. And so that is part of my reality now with this work. We grieve, the grief that we show is an extension of love we have for the person who died. So why would anyone want you to stop grieving? It doesn't make sense when you look at it from that perspective. Anything else? I can do this all day, guys. My pleasure.
There are some announcements.
Okay.
Wait just a moment.
Thank you, everyone, for coming and participating today. I know it's been beneficial. What? Oh, thank you, everyone, for coming today and for participating, and for those on Zoom as well. A reminder, this has been recorded. If you need to hear any of the suggestions or see the slides again, you can look at your leisure anytime you wish. Thank you, Joe,
My
for
pleasure.
your
Thank
time
you.
today. You've been great, and it's a difficult topic, but it's important for us all to work through. For those of you who are interested, we do have a vacancy on our Commission of Aging, which is the commission through the city that helps put on events like this. If you'd like today's workshop, if you're interested in becoming an advocate for seniors, any of those things, please consider joining us. Information is available on our city's website. I believe there's something in the back as well. On the resource table, one little hitch. Deadline to apply is today. So let's see those applications come in, please. If you're a day or two late, they might still consider it according to 1 day late. Okay, so please come join us. Also in the back, there is a survey. And that survey is important to the commission. It does help us to know what kinds of workshops and events you'd like to see. Also lets us know what we do right and wrong at these events. Yeah, if you could pass those out, please, that would be a great help back there. An email will also be sent to the participants if you'd like to do that via email. And there are QR codes available if you're here and you have a smartphone and you'd like to see the survey or other events. Joe, again, thank you for coming today, making that drive from Napa.
Sure.
I hope the drive back isn't
Thank
too
you very
rainy.
much. Thank you. Thank you all for being here today.